What if I told you that every single country on Earth, yes, even the richest ones, is drowning in debt? That the global economy runs not on gold or oil but on IOUs, promises, and borrowed time. And here's the kicker. Debt isn't just normal, it's by design. In today's world, the word debt usually comes with a heavy sigh. Whether it's a mortgage, credit card, or student loan, debt feels like something to avoid. But when we shift our lens from the personal to the national, a strange picture emerges. The US is in debt. Japan is in debt. Even oil-rich nations owe billions. But if everyone owes money, who's actually collecting? Welcome to the labyrinth of global finance, where sovereign debt is not a bug, it's a feature. What is national debt? First things first. What does it mean when we say a country is in debt? When a government spends more money than it collects in taxes, it runs a deficit. To cover that gap, it borrows, usually by issuing government bonds. These are essentially promises to repay investors with interest. That accumulated borrowing becomes the national debt. But here's the twist. National debt isn't just foreign banks or shadowy elites holding countries hostage. Often, the lenders are other governments, central banks, private citizens, even the country's own retirement funds and investment firms. In fact, in the US, over $7 trillion of its national debt is owned by the American public and institutions. Japan, the most indebted country relative to GDP, holds most of its own debt domestically. It's less like owing money to a loan shark, and more like borrowing from your future self. Why do countries borrow? So why borrow at all? Because modern governments have big responsibilities. Infrastructure, defense, education, healthcare, stimulus packages, disaster relief, and more. And tax revenue is rarely enough to cover it all, especially during emergencies or recessions. But here's where it gets fascinating. Borrowing is not always a bad thing. In fact, it's often a strategic economic lever. Governments use debt to stimulate growth when the economy slows down, invest in future productivity, manage currency strength and inflation, respond to crises such as wars or pandemics. During COVID-19, global debt surged by $20 trillion as countries fought to keep economies afloat. Without that borrowing, entire nations might have collapsed. But how much is too much? If debt can be useful, when does it become dangerous? This is where we introduce a crucial term, debt-to-GDP ratio, a measurement comparing what a country owes to what it produces in a year. For context, Japan's debt-to-GDP ratio is over 260%. The US is around 120%. Greece, post-crisis, hit 180%. Many developing nations stay below 60%, but that's changing fast. Generally, the higher the ratio, the riskier the country looks to investors. That can drive up interest rates, cause currency devaluation, or spark austerity measures that hurt citizens. But here's where it gets more complex. Unlike you or me, countries don't die. They don't retire. They roll over debt indefinitely. They borrow, pay off, and borrow again. As long as the economy grows, they can carry more debt, theoretically forever. Who holds the power? So who are the real power players in this system? Let's follow the money. The US owes much of its debt to itself. The Federal Reserve, pension funds, and domestic investors hold the majority. China and Japan each hold over $1 trillion in US Treasury bonds, not out of charity, but to stabilize trade relationships and store value. In Europe, countries share both debt and responsibility through the European Central Bank, which manages risk across the Eurozone. Even developing nations borrow from institutions like the World Bank or IMF, often with conditions attached, structural reforms, austerity, or open market commitments. This global web creates both interdependence and leverage, and sometimes geopolitical tension. When a superpower holds another country's debt, it can become a subtle tool of influence. When debt turns dangerous. Think of Argentina, which defaulted 9 times in its history, most recently in 2020. Or Greece, whose debt crisis in the 2010s triggered unemployment, budget cuts, and civil unrest. Or Sri Lanka, which ran out of foreign reserves and defaulted, triggering an economic meltdown. These crises aren't just numbers on a spreadsheet. They mean higher food prices, currency crashes, job losses, and mass migration. They happen when a country borrows in a foreign currency, can't grow fast enough to manage its debt, loses trust from global markets. Trust, not just numbers, is the true currency of national debt. How government debt affects you. If national debt is just a game of numbers between governments and central banks, why should you care? Because the consequences of that debt eventually trickle down, right into your wallet. Higher government debt often leads to higher taxes. That's the easiest way to raise revenue and service interest payments. It can also trigger spending cuts, especially in health, education, or public infrastructure. That means fewer benefits, longer wait times, and less investment in your community. If investors lose confidence in a country's ability to pay back debt, they may demand higher interest rates, which can lead to more expensive mortgages, car loans, and credit for everyday people. And if governments print money to pay off debt, that can lead to inflation, making your groceries, fuel, and rent cost more each year. Debt, currency, and global confidence. Debt also plays a massive role in how much your money is worth. When investors believe a country's finances are in trouble, they start selling off its currency. That drives down its value, and a weaker currency means imports get more expensive, fueling inflation. When the British pound dropped following the Brexit vote, UK imports, especially food and fuel, became more expensive almost overnight. The same thing happened in Turkey and Argentina, where currency collapses eroded people's life savings in a matter of months. All of this is often driven by one factor: confidence. As long as markets trust a government to manage its debt responsibly, the system works. But once that trust breaks, the dominoes start to fall. And in a highly interconnected global economy, those dominoes don't fall alone. The role of central banks and debt monetization. Let's talk about the unsung power brokers of modern economies, central banks. In times of crisis, like the 2008 financial crash or the COVID-19 pandemic, central banks often step in to buy government bonds. This is known as quantitative easing, or in simpler terms, printing money to buy debt. When done responsibly, this keeps the economy afloat. But when overused, it's like injecting steroids into a system that already has weak bones. Too much of it devalues the currency, sparks inflation, and reduces the effectiveness of monetary policy. This is why economists warn of something called debt monetization, when a government essentially prints its way out of debt. It's a slippery slope that leads to hyperinflation, as seen in Zimbabwe, where trillion-dollar notes became worthless; Venezuela, where people needed backpacks of cash to buy bread; Weimar Germany, where hyperinflation set the stage for political chaos. Debt isn't just a number, it's fuel or fire, depending on how it's used. The debt trap. Can countries go bankrupt? Let's address a burning question. Can a country go bankrupt? Technically, yes, but not in the same way a person or company does. A country defaults when it can't or won't pay its debt. This happened with Greece in 2012, Russia in 1998, and again during the Ukraine War, Sri Lanka in 2022, Lebanon, Ecuador, Argentina. The list goes on. When that happens, credit dries up. International aid becomes conditional. Social unrest can erupt. Investors flee, currency plummets, and poverty spikes. And once you're in that debt trap, where you borrowed just to pay off past debt, it becomes a vicious cycle. So how do countries escape? Some restructure their debt. Others raise taxes, slash spending, or beg for bailouts. But most try to grow their way out of it, boosting GDP so the debt-to-GDP ratio shrinks naturally. It's like climbing a financial mountain with a backpack full of bricks. Possible, but painfully slow. What you can do. So what does all of this mean for you? It means that even though you can't control national debt, you can prepare your personal economy. Diversify your income streams. Don't rely on just one employer or sector. Invest in real assets, like skills, property, or businesses, not just volatile stocks. Stay informed. Understanding how macroeconomics works gives you an edge. Here's the truth. Every country is in debt, and that's not likely to change anytime soon. But understanding how the system works, and where it's headed, empowers you to make better decisions in an unpredictable world. We're not just living through economic history, we're shaping it. If you found this breakdown helpful, insightful, or even eye-opening, subscribe to Finance Facts for more deep dives into the hidden forces shaping our money, our world, and our future. Drop a comment below. What do you think about national debt? Dangerous addiction or economic necessity? This is Finance Facts, helping you stay smart, stay sharp, and stay ahead.